Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Eden Maybon of lightcycleastrology.com. And today we are getting into part 3 of the 5 biggest astrology transits for 2023. In part 1, we went into Saturn ingressing into the sign of Pisces this year. In part 2, we went into the double Aries new moon this year. And in part 3, we're getting into the big one. This is Pluto entering Aquarius. So let me go ahead and pull up my presentation here and share with you some of the meaning that this has for us. Now, Pluto enters Aquarius on March 7th and only travels a little bit inside the sign to 0 degrees and 21 arc minutes within the sign. So it's just hanging out in that first degree. But by May's day, it stations to turn retrograde, and then it retrogrades back out by June 11th, spending approximately 3 months in the sign for 2023. So that is just us getting to just experience the first little dip. It's just a little toe dip of what Pluto in Aquarius is going to be like. Next year, 2024, right at the beginning on January 21st, Pluto enters Aquarius for the second time. But during the year, he dips back out in his retrograde motion for about 2 months. And but by by November, he re-enters Aquarius. And that is where Pluto will remain traveling through Aquarius over the next 18 years and 4 months. Now, he leaves for the first time on March 2043. So that's, that's a long time for a planet to be hanging out in one sign. We've had roughly that same amount of time to experience Pluto going through the sign of Capricorn. And we're going to get into that in a second here. But what are the differences? This is the main thing that is interesting from an ancient astrological practice, looking at it through the non-modern rulerships of Aquarius. We're going to say again that in ancient astrology, Saturn was the ruler of Aquarius. So this is really important. Now, in ancient astrology, Saturn rules both the sign of Capricorn and Aquarius. So you could at first think, well, what's the difference? If Pluto is transiting through Capricorn, a Saturn-ruled sign, and then there's a change into Aquarius, a Saturn-ruled sign, what's the difference? And in some ways, that's a really good question, because in some ways, there is a continuation of that same archetypal theme. But there are some key differences here. And those differences I've outlined here. So Aquarius is a solid air temple of Saturn in his masculine, young, or daytime form, whichever way you prefer to think of that as. What that means is that the difference here is Capricorn is a cardinal sign. It is the sign that pivots us into a new season. It turns us into a new season. In the ancient world, that was the basis for the word tropical was called tropos. So Capricorn pivots us or turns us into a new season. And it was said to be an earthy temple. And it was said to also be the archetype of Saturn in her feminine yin or nighttime form. And in the ancient Thema Mundi, the ancient astrologers ascribed each planet, except for the sun and the moon, to 2 signs, 2 temples, 2 domiciles, the same thing, right? We sometimes call those signs, or we can also refer to them as temples or domiciles, but it's the same thing, right? There's 12 of them, and you remove the sun and the moon, and Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the rest of the planets get 2 homes. And what they did is to balance this this brilliant way that we are going to express all of the different forms that can happen in the material realm and in the spiritual higher realms. We're going to divide one planet into 2 forms, the masculine and the feminine. But that's also equal to, if you don't like to think of it in that way, also equal to the yin and the yang, the nighttime and the daytime. So that is another way you can think about that. What does that mean? Well, the big change here is that when Pluto was transiting through Capricorn, it was transiting in an earthly sign. So things are more about Earth, right? They're going to be more about the land, the control of the Earth, maybe the minerals or things like that. And there is a change of the season. So Pluto goes into Capricorn, and it's going to express itself through the archetype of Saturn's turning way that it turns things from one thing to another. So that is where you really start to see something new, a new season coming about. So all things Pluto begin to turn towards something new at that point. And they do so with matters regarding earthly types of things. But the process, it's slow. It's more internalized or process oriented. So it shifts us at that time to these somewhat new Plutonian types of expressions through Saturn, but it does so in a way that it takes a while for that process to occur, either on the inside, you know, or if it is in the outside world, it happens in such a way that it takes a while. It's a slow thing. Saturn's already a slow planet. Now, the difference is that when Saturn is expressed in the sign of Aquarius, and Pluto enters that realm, there is much more of an airy or mental things that have to do with air, as we'll see here in a minute. But the season is stabilized because Capricorn is the beginning of a new season, and Aquarius is the middle of the season, and Pisces is the end of that season of winter. All three of those comprise the winter. Aquarius being in the middle, that means that whatever was begun or turned within Capricorn now becomes stable. It now becomes solid. So the ancients called this a solid sign in terms of modality, which is different from a tropo sign or turning sign that we have from Capricorn. So this gives us a clue right off the bat that we're not necessarily seeing things that are new completely. We're seeing somewhat new things that have already begun with Pluto in Capricorn become more stabilized, become more integrated into the zeitgeist, if you will. So that is some of the differences. Now, the other thing, though, is that because it is classified as a masculine or yang or daytime expression of Saturn, we're also going to see a slightly more quick external acting process. It's more externalized out in the world. Saturn is not a fast-moving planet, so this is compared to Capricorn. So it's still not super fast like Mars or anything, but you know, it's a slow outer planet that moves very slowly, and that's how it works. But compared to Capricorn, we will see a little bit of an increase in the activities that happen regarding Pluto doing things or expressing things through this Saturn way. So those are some of the changes. Now, let's just get into Saturn, define that archetype so we understand, because Pluto has to now express itself through still a Saturn expression, but it has to do it through a little bit different form of a Saturn expression. So now that we understand the form is slightly changed, it's masculine, it's solid, it's airy. Now let's just refresh ourselves on what Saturn is like in general so we can understand how does Pluto express in a Saturn kind of way. Within the ancient Thema Mundi, the temples of Saturn are opposite to the temples of the lights. So that is really a big part of the meaning of Saturn. So Capricorn is opposite to the moon's temple of Cancer, and Aquarius is opposite to the sun's temple of Leo. Now, the lights were thought of as the noetic lights of knowing, and it was imagined that there was a spirit that could possess you. So the sun's archetype is one that possesses or brings or stirs desires for you to be, do, become, want, desire after. And that is this kind of light that is all consuming. It's hard to see anything outside of that. Well, Saturn being on the opposite side of the visible universe and in the Thema Mundi sort of represents the fracturing of the material or spiritual oneness of the cosmos. So if the sun represents the eternal oneness, right? The center of everything, Godhead, Saturn naturally represents how does God become material? How does God fracture into duality and really becomes the God or the Lord of everything that in the material universe is defining itself by in terms of an opposite. So you, for instance, you wouldn't understand what is a day if you never experienced night. You wouldn't understand what is masculine if you never understood nurturing feminine, or if you want to think of it in terms of yin or yang. But these two terms that are basically coming from oneness and fracturing into a definable opposite. That is Saturn. He is the Lord of all opposites, good, bad, evil, beneficent, everything opposite that you can think of, up, down, in and out, everything opposite that is the Lord of opposites is Saturn. So he naturally defines the opposition within the astrology aspects in astrology. He is the Lord of contrariety, and he is defining the duality within the material universe. He is also a god that is sitting at the gateway looking in and looking out. So he is the most distant planet, and he is very dim compared to Jupiter, who is also pretty far out there. Saturn is quite dim, and he has the position to be able to look inwards back at the inner solar system, looking back towards the sun. But he also is sitting on the threshold where he is able to look out into the vast eternal beyond. So that is really interesting. He is also a god of the border, of the wall, of the gateway. And a lot of people think that, especially in modern astrology, myself included for many years, that Saturn represents walls or borders or something like that. And he does. He is the god of walls. But it's more, I think, that on a deeper level, Saturn represents the wall, but also both sides of the wall, the side of the wall that is outside and the side of the wall that is inside. That's where we get a lot of Aquarian archetypes, where you get populism, but you also get somebody that's like homeless and living on the streets. You get the popular senator that is the upholder of the zeitgeist, and it creates the political social movements that are mainstream. But you also get the guy that renounces society and is just living outside of that. So that is Saturn. Other archetypes of Saturn having to do with this distance thing. He's distant. So if you're in that place where you're on the borderlands, this can cause melancholy. It can also cause genius, but you can sort of be sad and wistful and longing, but you can be detached at the same time. And this can give you the perspective needed to really find genius. So we also have a connection with science, study, hard work, emptying of the self-effulgence, a term I got from Adam Ellenboss, my teacher, because again, Saturn is sitting opposite to the lights in the Thema Mundi. What the sun fills you up in desire, Saturn being the opposite of that can empty you out of that same desire. And that prepares you for a progress of material existence where you're going to experience new things, but you can't experience new things. You can't even be filled up by another noetic light if you're so full that you just remain one way forever. So while the sun represents unity and oneness, nothing would move down here in the material realm if you are always just one thing. So Saturn represents this ability to first empty you out and make you available for something new. Now, oftentimes that's painful, and it can cause sadness and detachment, disillusionment. Those are all characteristics of the Saturn archetype. Okay, so now let's take a look at when was the last time that Pluto went through Aquarius. Well, that was happening between 1777 and 1779. The time before that happened between 1532 and 1553. So that's interesting because we can sort of go back historically and see maybe if there's something speaking to the archetype in question here. But the significations for Pluto itself, we also have to look at those. Now that we understand Aquarius and Saturn, let's take a look at what are some of the archetypal combinations that we see for Pluto itself. And these are going to be based on two things: the circumstances surrounding Pluto's discovery in 1930, and also the physical characteristics of the planet itself. So let me explain that a little bit. The reason why we look at the circumstances surrounding its discovery is because the discovery or first appearance of a planet is going to speak as an omen to what it may represent. And we can also use the physical characteristics as potential metaphorical or symbolic characteristics for also significations. Some of the things, when we combine those two things, are going to be invisibility, because this planet is invisible without the use of technology. Or it could be thought of as hidden. Now, I know a lot of people that already know something about Pluto are going to remember, yes, hidden, or things coming to light or being revealed when there are Pluto transits or planets making aspects to Pluto. Things often become unhidden or become discovered. Undiscovering or discovery. Excuse me. Uncovering or discovery. The same type of thing. This whole notion that there was a before and after, that, for me at least, speaks to the significations of Pluto itself, simply because at one point in the ancient world, there was no Pluto. Everything that Pluto represents now had been represented by other archetypes and other planets. So there was a before, and then there was an after. So for me, one of the big significations of Pluto and Neptune and Uranus are simply that we are getting close to something that represents discovery or uncovery in Pluto's specific case, I think. Now, obsessive. Why is Pluto obsessive? Have you ever obsessed about that? Well, the reason that I think it may be connected to obsession is because it took a very obsessive man to discover it. The obsession that he had for his whole life discovering Pluto was unbelievable. And he worked very, very hard. He was very tedious. There was photography analysis involved. And, you know, one could definitely say he was a genius. So I think that Pluto also connects to this obsessiveness and genius quality. But genius also gets at something that was circumstantially happening around the time of Pluto's discovery. And that was that we were starting to get into the science that deals with the subatomic nuclear reactions. We were starting to get into all of these subatomic worlds of science, nuclear reactions and bombs and things like this, nuclear energy. So I definitely see a correlation to the subatomic, nuclear. And what is that? Well, what's really interesting, both regarding the physical characteristics of the planet Pluto and also the omen characteristics of the circumstances surrounding its discovery, is that there could be some sense in which there is a release of frozen energy. Okay, and I think that is what you see. Einstein said that he was worried when people were starting to do atomic energy, because essentially the matter, the innate energy within matter, when you split the atom, it releases that energy. And so its matter is holding or trapping or freezing the innate amount of energy within it. And as they learned how to split atoms, that energy, part of the energy gets released. It gets released from its frozen circumstance. So how is that? We get the release of frozen energy. That is what essentially happens when you have a nuclear or subatomic splitting reaction. I think that there is a correlation between that and upheaval. We generally see historically through these last periods where we look at Pluto in Aquarius, there is a lot of upheaval politically, societally, religiously. There is a lot of upheaval. There is a lot of power struggles. Pluto, think about it, is sitting beyond Saturn even. And when we talk about Saturn is sitting on the edge of the visible universe, looking in and looking out. In the ancient world, Saturn represented the death that occurred in the winter that was antithetical to the life that occurred in the summer. You know, there is this sense in which, okay, if Saturn was already prescribed the doorstep of the gateway of Hades, or the beyond world, the realm of the dead, right? Saturn sat on the edge of the dead. So what could Pluto represent if it's outside of that gateway? Well, I think it could represent things like supernatural journeys, the afterlife, beyond the grave, things that are beyond death, because there are things beyond death. And so I think Pluto represents those things as well. Now, one really, really, really interesting thing about supernatural journeys is because I think that this could include everything from shamanistic, like ayahuasca type of medicine journeys, anything shaman related that is in a different realm. But I also think that it could relate to people that are transmitting messages from the dead, necromancy, things like that. But what's really, really interesting is that the discoverer of Pluto, let me just grab his name again. I'm drawing a blank. Do I even have it? Oh, man. Well, put it in the chat. I think it's Tomble. I think his last name was Tomble, but put it in the chat if you know that for me. But the Tomble, I believe, was the discoverer of Pluto, the man that worked very hard and was obsessed at trying to find this anomaly of math within the perturbations of the orbits of newly discovered Uranus. That man, when he was cremated, he was honored by being put on a space probe that was sent out to Pluto. And when it got nearest to Pluto, some of his ashes were somehow actually deposited from the space probe. They were released from the probe, and I guess theoretically they landed on Pluto. So if that's the case, that is so profound, it like makes the hairs stand up on my neck. I mean, the man discovers it, and he's essentially the first human to ever have some of his mortal remains deposited on an alien world, as far as I know. Anyway, so that in itself, I mean, think about the significance of that. I think in the mundane sense, this is going to translate as something being related to just general things that have to do with afterlife matters, such as funerals or carrying out final wishes of people that leave final wishes to you, like I want you to take my remains to the top of Mount Everest or something like that. I think that Pluto could represent some of those things too. So there is that interesting connection with Pluto. Now also, transfiguration. A lot of people talk about Pluto and they say transform. Pluto's all about transforming. I don't disagree with that, but I like the word transfiguration more than I like the word transform. They're both related, obviously, but transfiguration, I love this definition I pulled just out of the dictionary: a complete change of form, which is, okay, right there, that's what you have, transform. So far the same as transform, but a complete change of form or appearance, specifically into a more beautiful or spiritual state. So for me, it's like, wow, that really hits home for me. Pluto is the planet of the dark night of the soul. As it transits your natal birth chart, there seems to be a period that you go through where you transfigure. You go through a very difficult, disruptive time where there's upheaval. You seem to break down. Pluto seems to almost annihilate every part of you, and you come out the other side almost like you're reborn into a completely different form. But it is often connected with some sense of spiritual, development. It's like a soul journey. And so the complete change of form or appearance into a more beautiful or spiritual state. So I like that for Pluto. Now, a couple final things with Pluto that are things that happened, the circumstances that happened around the initial discovery of the planet was that, as we all know, this one, I'm surprised, hasn't come into the symbolism lexicon or the symbolic lexicon of Pluto. Demotion. Well, we all know that Pluto was initially classified as a planet and was a planet for many years. And then Neil deGrasse Tyson was instrumental in saying, wait a minute, should this be a planet? And that suggestion got finalized as a demotion for Pluto based on it wasn't big enough. There were other criteria, but basically, because Pluto didn't measure up, it was demoted. So I think that there's some sense in which things connected to Pluto could symbolize things not measuring up and taking a fall in demotion or power. Reclassify, same kind of thing. And another thing that you often hear that's really nice, like Chris Brennan will cite this as somebody else that he's heard this from, making big things small and small things big. I call that extreme size inversion. So whatever seems to be a big deal becomes micro. Whatever seems to be not a big deal becomes huge. There is some sense in which Pluto tends to invert the proportionality into extreme levels. So things like, again, we're going back to like atomic science, right? Atomic, the very, very small. But if you take that very, very small thing and somehow split it, man, does that create a big, big reaction. And because of this whole, because they were creating the atom bomb at the time of its discovery, I think we see things like, and also because Pluto is just, it's so far out into space. It's incredibly far out into space. You're talking about things like the end of worlds, right? There are no more worlds, even if we discover them. I think Pluto will represent the redundancy of the end of worlds and annihilation because the atomic bomb. So both of those things are actually interestingly connected, because the end of worlds and annihilation, just the sense that you get with the language itself, this connection with atomic fusion and bombs that could annihilate us. Pluto tends to crush the soul as it moves past Saturn. Some people believe that when the soul's journey comes in and reincarnates into a body, it has to travel past all of the planets, and it picks up things from each of the planet. The soul puts on clothing of Saturn and clothing of Jupiter, and it comes in, and by the time it incarnates, it has all of these material layers to it. And some people believe, or it's been suggested, that as you on your journey to the afterlife, you remove those layers one by one. I wonder if by the time you get past Saturn, if all three of the outer planets are essentially working on that core essence of the soul that is beyond any kind of earthly existence. It is just, profoundly crushing in some way. It crushes the soul down to the very tiny, minute spiritual essence that is far removed from anything connected to experiences that we've had. That I wonder about that, if Pluto could somehow be representing something like that. Okay, so that is Pluto. The last times it was in Aquarius, and also some of Pluto's significations. Now, let's talk about what happened actually during the last times Pluto was in Aquarius. 2 cycles ago, we had 1532 to 1553. And we had just a few things that are interesting. The introduction of chocolate into Europe. That's just a fun one, but just think about that one for a second. The big one here is the Copernican revolution oh, I got this wrong. I guess it was 15. Sorry, excuse that typo, guys. It's actually 1543 instead of 1943. In 1543, Copernicus, a Polish native, published his theory that the Earth was not the center of the universe, suggesting a heliocentric model of cosmology, which changed humanity and science forever. This had massive implications, but I think beyond going into this, really, you just can see revolution. It was the Copernican revolution. So Aquarius is associated with revolutions. That outsider tendency of Saturn causes a revolt against the status quo. So when you have Pluto, a planet that could be connected to upheaval, going through a sign that is connected with this rebellious Saturnine quality, you get revolutions oftentimes. So we saw a scientific revolution, very Saturn, very Pluto. And that was in 1532 to 1553. Now, the last period, Pluto's last time in Aquarius was 1777 through 1799. In 1779, this is really fun. I almost should have shown you a picture of this, and this is of the Iron Bridge. They called it the Iron Bridge because it was essentially the first cast iron bridge ever built. And this was an innovation in science. Interestingly enough, so they were using cast iron right before, this is 1779, this is 2 years after Pluto ingresses into Aquarius. So you can see this is really early on. So again, we have that distinction here, I think, between Pluto and Capricorn and Pluto and Aquarius. In Pluto and Capricorn, the science of Saturn and the discovery of Pluto was working through the earth element. So we're talking about the minerals, the iron. They develop, they start working with the cast iron, and right on the edge of Pluto going into Aquarius, that's when they're finally able to express that in the yang expression. It becomes, instead of the process being discovered and worked out with the element of earth and its slow transition, boom, Pluto goes into Aquarius and the modality changes into a daytime yang masculine form. And there you go. There's the structure out there in the world as the first innovation of cast iron structures. That's huge. So that's a revolution. Now, one thing I picked up on Wikipedia for the decade of the 1780s is really interesting. I'm not even going to say it differently than the way that they wrote it here. The 1780s was a period widely considered as transitional between the Age of Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. There we go, that word again. Seeing the rise of modern philosophy and the rise on astronomical, technological, and political discoveries and innovations such as the discovery of Uranus, cast iron on structures, republicanism, hot air balloons, steamboats, parachutes, a lot of stuff connected with air there, right? We have politics, the mental musings of the mind, right? In a political sense. We have hot air balloons, obviously air. We have steamboats, right? We're taking water and we're like, changing its form into water, steam, vapor. And we have parachutes. So you really see that air element. The 1780s kickstarted a rapid global industrialization movement, leaving behind the world's predominantly agrarian customs in the past. Wow. So all of those things get going in Capricorn. But by the time Pluto enters Aquarius, those trends are standardized, normalized. They are considered a part of the status quo, a part of the zeitgeist. This is the way it is now, right? We were transitioning a while back, but now this is how reality is. It's never going back. I think that is very Aquarian right there. And I hope I pronounce this correctly. Antoine Lavoisier, father of modern chemistry, recognized and named oxygen and its role in combustion. So again, that air element. I think that that is really poignant right there. Okay, and last but not least here, let's get into finally some of the things that I could see, some of the predictions for Pluto in Aquarius this time around. Everything within the realm of science, tech, the space, becoming stabilized. Again, so we've already had, SpaceX, we've already had a lot of scientific and technological advances in the last couple of decades, but now we're going to see these things becoming stabilized to the point where it's unimaginable that life wouldn't have those things incorporated at a very, intricate and permanent level. It's part of the fabric. You can't imagine it without it anymore. That's the transition I see. I see all of the science that all the technology and science and space themes being integrated to that level. So we're not necessarily maybe going to see some things that are completely new, but rather we're going to see things that are integrated beyond, imagination. New discoveries in all of these areas, forever transforming the human experience. I do think that we will see new ideas that add to that fabric. Politics around air pollution, flight travel, space travel, and social mediums and news institutions in a normalized or upheaval. That, again, we've already seen all of this dichotomy, all of this contrarianism of ideological preferences in the society. With the air pollution, that's nothing new, right? We've been living with that for more than 20 years. But I think that what it is now, it's going to be more normalized. We're going to be so used to the idea of these upheaval happening all around us, to the sense where it's like, what's new? You turn on the TV and it's like, there's more upheaval. It's like, what else is new? I think that's where we're headed. We're going to forget the past, that, hey, there was a time where there wasn't upheaval. Upheaval will be the new norm, and it's going to influence all of these things, but we're going to move more into things like flight travel, space travel, all of those types of things. Nuclear energy becoming a major wedge issue against other alternative energies. I think I'm just predicting that one because of the connection that Pluto has with nuclear energy. And with all of the conversations about how are we going to provide energy for us in the centuries to come, those are issues already. And oftentimes people bring up nuclear energy and they lay that on the table, and then it's a scary idea. So a lot of times nothing comes of it. I think with Pluto in Aquarius this time, somehow that is going to be realized or manifested to a new level that we haven't seen before. So it could be that there are discoveries in nuclear energy that mitigate the level of fear around it. Nanotech versus superstructures, maybe in the sky or in outer space, space habitations, things like that. But again, much more integrated into the fabric of society. The Second American Revolution and the Third World War. it seems like when you look historically back at Pluto and Aquarius, that you do tend to see a lot of upheaval and war. So there has already been talk about maybe a revolution in America with the way things are going. A lot of people, Tim Pool, a lot of people are talking about things like this. So I could definitely see this happening, or at least over the next 20 years, getting to the point where there's no stopping it beyond Pluto and Aquarius. And of course, maybe this on a bigger level with the Third World War. We're already in war right now. And so hopefully not, but maybe there's an escalation on that stage. Emerging into the metaverse, the way we are now emerged into the online world. So I actually was discussing this with my dad a couple of days back, and I said, I think that could be something that we see in the future. And he was kind of like, oh, do you really think, I don't know. It seems like, but I remember there was a time when you couldn't remember living without your phone, right? There was a time, there was a time where you could remember not even having a cell phone, if you're old enough like me. There was a time when the internet was still a novelty, or even social media platforms like Facebook was kind of a novelty. Now those things are so integrated into our world because they've been around long enough. I think that the metaverse is the next big thing that is really going to be integrated to a level where we can't imagine life without it anymore. It's just as a part of our world as us always having the smartphone or cell phone in our hand. Now people take the smartphone everywhere they go. People make clothing for smartphone pockets. I mean, it is quite normal to see nearly everybody around you, if you're waiting at an airport or wherever you are, to be just completely immersed in that world. I think that the metaverse is going to be the next innovation built upon that. And it's a much more immersive world, especially when we're talking about things like Saturn going into Pisces. So I could see the metaverse becoming a big, big part of the way humans experience life going forward. Everything from having jobs in the metaverse, making money, investments, avatars, all that kind of stuff. Okay, now one kind of fun thing is maybe hovercraft or new innovations of small type personal travel. So if they had invented the bicycle in previous Pluto and Aquarius periods, what maybe could be coming next that is like the bicycle, but something new? Could it be hovercraft, like in Back to the Future? What was it, 2 or 3? 2. Back to the Future 2, they had the hovercraft. Maybe something like that, something air related, or just some other kind of small personal vehicle that we just can't even imagine right now. Maybe something like that could be invented. Emerging into a new form of global or superblock government, or new models of governmental theory. So just like they had an emergence of republicanism, which is a theory on governmental organization, right? Just as that came about during the previous period of Pluto and Aquarius, I wonder if there isn't going to be some new form of government that people come up with that is a hybrid or different somehow than the one we know today, especially with all of the turmoil in the world. Or maybe there is this stabilization and integration of globalism that breaks apart nationalism, and there's the formation of superblocks, right? The whole North American, South American block, the Asian block, and maybe the Euro block or something like that, where there's superblocks. I'm wondering about things like that. So those are some of the predictions that I am wondering about for Pluto and Aquarius this time around. Now, again, we're only seeing this for about 3 months in 2023, but in 2024, it goes in there, and that's when we really get to see what it's going to be like. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. I'll be back with part 4 tomorrow, and that is going to be the Venus station retrograde that is happening this year. I appreciate everybody watching and subscribing to the channel lately. That really means a lot to me, and it helps the algorithm to grow. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you real soon. Bye.